The room went dead silent as the last note echoed through the air. The woman at the back of the room froze. She recognized the song. The song her first love had written just for her. Have you ever heard something that made your heart race? Something you thought you'd never hear again? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. And if you believe love has a way of finding you when you least expect it, hit that subscribe button. You're not going to want to miss how this one unfolds. Now, let me take you back to where it all began. The town of Cedar Creek was quiet that Friday night. A place where everyone knew everyone, and big city problems felt like a lifetime away. It was the kind of town where people stopped by the coffee shop just to say hello, or to grab something for the road. A place that had its own rhythm, a rhythm that was about to change. Ethan Miller sat at a small piano in the corner of the diner, his fingers brushing over the keys. The sound was soft, almost like a whisper, but the room stilled with every note. He wasn't playing for the applause. He wasn't even playing for anyone to listen. He played because it was the only way he knew how to feel again. His hands moved over the familiar chords, a song that was both his and not his. His wife had loved this melody. It was the last song she'd ever asked him to play for her before she passed, and ever since, it had been the only way he could feel close to her again. But there was no one left to hear it. Not really. Just the hum of the diner's lights and the occasional clink of dishes. Ethan wiped a hand over his brow. The man he was now felt like someone else, someone who had forgotten what it meant to dream. Raising a daughter on his own hadn't been easy. His days were spent fixing up broken faucets and hauling boxes of supplies in and out of the family-owned hardware store. But tonight he had a few hours of peace. The music was his escape, his solace. Outside, the small crowd of locals trickled in, ready for their weekend hangouts. They barely noticed the quiet man in the corner, the single dad who fixed more than just broken pipes. The town loved him, but they didn't really know him. And then she walked in. Grace Sinclair, the CEO from the big city. Ethan glanced up from the keys, his fingers halting mid-song. He'd seen her walking by the hardware store earlier in the day, a suit too sharp for this sleepy town. She was the kind of person who belonged in a skyscraper, not in a place like this. But here she was, stepping inside, her eyes scanning the room with a confidence that made everything else seem quieter. She didn't look like she belonged. She didn't look like anyone who came from here. And yet, there she was. Grace slid into a booth by the window, her back straight, her expression cold, as though she were still running a meeting in her mind. The barista brought her a coffee, the only thing she'd order in places like this. She didn't smile. She didn't seem to be interested in the low-key, relaxed vibe of the diner. She was here for something or someone. Ethan didn't think much of it. It wasn't uncommon to see strangers in Cedar Creek. But there was something about her. Something that made his heart skip a beat. Something familiar, though he couldn't put his finger on it. He decided to keep playing, hoping his music would fill the space between the emptiness and the unexpected. Grace couldn't explain why she walked into the diner. She had a meeting tomorrow with a company that wanted to buy out the Cedar Creek hardware store, a move that would push out the local family business. But when she passed by the window and saw the old piano, she felt something tug at her, a memory she hadn't thought about in years. She sat down, trying to shake the feelings that were rising within her. But there was something about the air in this place. The way everything felt slower. The way people didn't need to rush to be happy. She could hear the quiet hum of life, but she didn't know if she wanted to be part of it. And then he started playing. Her breath caught in her throat. The melody was familiar. It wasn't a song she'd heard in years, but she knew it instantly. It was the same tune her first love had written for her. The song that he had promised would stay with her forever. She hadn't heard it since she was young, when the world was different, before her career, before the hustle, before the heartbreak. Grace's eyes closed for a moment as the music washed over her, taking her back to another time, another place. It was as if the past had come alive in the present. Her first love, the one who had given her that song and vanished without a trace. But how could this man, this single dad, sitting in the corner of a diner, be playing it? She had to know. She had to ask. Grace stood up, her legs unsteady. Her mind raced with 1,000 questions. How could it be him? The man playing? Could it really be? Grace hesitated for a moment, her heart pounding in her chest. The questions swirled in her mind. Was it possible? Could the man playing that song really be him? But there was something more. The music had stirred feelings in her that she'd long buried. And now she couldn't just leave. She needed to know. With each step she took toward the piano, the past loomed larger, the pull of those memories undeniable. The hum of conversation faded as the last notes drifted from the piano. The diner fell quiet. Ethan lifted his hands from the keys, a faint smile ghosting across his lips. He didn't notice Grace standing a few steps away, frozen in place, her coffee untouched on the counter behind her. For a moment, she just stood there, staring at him, at the man who had unknowingly played that melody. Her heart pounded like a drum. She didn't even know what to say. Ethan looked up, startled when he saw her. I'm sorry, was it too loud?" he asked with an awkward chuckle. Grace shook her head. No, not at all. That song, it's beautiful. Where did you learn it?" Ethan's eyes softened, the corners of his mouth twitching into a faint smile. "My wife used to love it. I learned it for her years ago." Grace felt her stomach twist. His wife. There was a pang of guilt for even asking, but she pressed on, her voice quiet. Did she tell you where it came from?" He shook his head. "No. She said she heard it once at a little college concert when she was younger. Said it stuck with her ever since." Grace's fingers trembled. Her chest tightened. That concert. She remembered it. It had been years ago at a campus fundraiser when her first love, Daniel, had played that very song for her in front of the crowd. He'd written it just for her. She blinked hard, trying to keep her composure. "That's impossible," she whispered under her breath. Ethan tilted his head. "Sorry." She forced a smile. "Nothing. Just, it brought back memories, I guess." Their eyes met for a moment that felt longer than it should have. Two strangers, connected by a melody that neither fully understood. Grace turned away before he could see the emotion building in her eyes. "You play really well," she said softly, her tone steadier now. "Thank you," he replied, his voice low. "Just a hobby now. Haven't played for an audience in years." She wanted to say more, to ask how this man, this small-town single dad, had somehow stumbled across a song that belonged to her past. But before she could, the door opened and a small voice called out, "Daddy!" A little girl, no more than 7, ran into the diner, her backpack bouncing with every step. Ethan turned, his face lighting up with warmth. "Hey, sweetheart," he said, crouching down to her level. "How was school?" "Good. Miss Parker said I did the best drawing in class today." Grace's heart softened at the sight. There was something so pure in the way the little girl threw her arms around him. A simple, honest kind of love. The kind she hadn't felt in years. Ethan stood, smiling at his daughter, his hand resting gently on her shoulder. "That's amazing, Lily. I'm proud of you." Grace watched quietly, her chest tightening again. The way he spoke to his daughter. Calm, loving, steady. It reminded her of something she'd lost. Something she hadn't realized she missed until now. The girl turned to her. "Hi, I'm Lily." Grace knelt down slightly, smiling. "Hi, Lily. I'm Grace. That's a beautiful name." "Thank you. Daddy says my name means light." Grace's smile wavered. "It suits you," she whispered. Ethan rubbed the back of his neck, a little embarrassed. "Sorry about her. She's friendly." "I don't mind," Grace said softly. "She's lovely." For a few seconds, silence lingered. It wasn't awkward, it was gentle, almost peaceful. Then Grace cleared her throat. "I should probably get going. I have an early meeting tomorrow." Ethan nodded. "Of course. Thanks for listening." She paused, then pulled out a business card from her purse. "If you ever want to play for an event, I know a few people who'd appreciate your talent." He hesitated before taking it. "Thank you, but I don't really perform anymore." Grace smiled faintly. "Maybe you should." She left before he could respond, the door chiming softly behind her. Outside, Grace stood by her car, gripping the steering wheel before sliding inside. Her reflection stared back at her in the rearview mirror. A successful woman with everything she'd ever wanted, except peace. Her mind raced back to the college auditorium. Daniel, his hands on the piano, the crowd cheering. He had promised her that song would always be theirs. And now a stranger, a widowed father, had played it with the same tenderness, the same ache. It didn't make sense. She pressed a hand to her chest, trying to steady her breathing. Maybe it was just a coincidence. But deep down, she knew better. The song meant something. She had to find out what. Back in the diner, Ethan tucked Lily into his arms, watching her yawn. Ready to head home, Peanut? Yeah, she murmured. Daddy, who was that lady? He smiled softly. Just someone who liked the music. Did she make you happy? The question caught him off guard. What makes you ask that? Lily shrugged. You smiled different when you talked to her. Ethan chuckled. You're imagining things, kiddo. But even as he turned off the lights and locked the door behind them, he couldn't shake the thought of Grace's face. The way her eyes looked when she heard the song. The way she seemed to freeze, like she'd seen a ghost. Something about her reaction didn't feel random. And something inside him wanted to know why. You ever meet someone who makes you question everything? Like life just paused for a second? If you've felt that before, you'll understand what's coming next. Grace sat in her car, staring at the small-town lights fading in the distance. She should have driven away hours ago, but her heart wouldn't let her. That song, their song, was calling her back. And Ethan, watching the night sky from his porch, couldn't stop wondering who the woman in the diner really was, and why she looked like she was carrying a piece of his past. Neither of them knew it yet. But this was only the beginning. The morning light filtered through Ethan's kitchen window, landing softly on the old family photos pinned to the fridge. He flipped pancakes while Lily sat at the counter, swinging her legs, talking about her art project. It was an ordinary morning, or at least it should have been. But his thoughts kept drifting back to the night before. Grace, the woman from the diner. He couldn't explain why she lingered in his mind. There was something about the way she looked at him when he played. It wasn't just admiration, it was recognition. Like the song had opened something she'd buried deep. Daddy, you burned it again, Lily said, wrinkling her nose. He blinked and laughed, flipping the pancake that was definitely past saving. Guess I was daydreaming. You always do that when you're thinking too hard, she teased. He grinned. You're getting too smart for your own good, kiddo. But inside he knew she was right. He was thinking too hard. About Grace. About the song. About the strange sense of connection that made no sense at all. Across town, Grace sat in her hotel suite, coffee going cold beside her laptop. The city skyline in the distance was nothing compared to the quiet view of Cedar Creek, the same place she'd promised herself she'd only stay for one night. Yet she hadn't left. She told her assistant she was extending her visit for business reasons, but she knew that wasn't the truth. It wasn't business. It was him. Grace had tried to shake it off, telling herself it was just a coincidence. A man who happened to play a familiar song. But no matter how much logic she used, her heart wasn't buying it. She opened her email and saw a reminder about the upcoming acquisition deal, the hardware store in Cedar Creek. She was supposed to finalize the paperwork that afternoon. Her chest tightened. The name on the file read Miller's Hardware. Her hand froze over the trackpad. Miller. Ethan Miller. Her mind raced. Could it be the same man? The same store? She pushed the laptop aside and rubbed her temples. This is ridiculous, she whispered. It's just a name. But deep down, she knew it wasn't just a name. That afternoon, Ethan stood outside the store, restocking tools with the help of his brother, Tom. The air smelled of sawdust and motor oil, familiar and grounding. Hey, Tom said, wiping his hands on a rag. Heard the new company's coming in today. Some big firm from the city. They're looking to buy out the smaller places. You ready for that talk? Ethan shrugged. Ready as I'll ever be. You sure? I mean, you've worked here since Dad opened this place. I know, Ethan said quietly. But if it means a better future for Lily, I'll listen. Tom studied him for a second. You don't sound convinced. I'm not, Ethan admitted. But life doesn't always ask what we want, right? Tom gave a slow nod. Still, don't let anyone walk all over you. You've built something good here. Ethan smiled faintly. Thanks, man. The bell above the store door jingled, and there she was. Grace stood in the doorway, the sunlight behind her. She looked different in daylight, softer somehow, though her expression was still guarded. Ethan froze for a second before managing a polite smile. Grace, right? She nodded. Ethan. Tom glanced between them, confused but amused. Well, looks like I'll let you two talk business, he said with a smirk, disappearing into the back. Grace walked closer, heels clicking on the worn tile. I didn't realize this was your store, she said. He chuckled. Small world, huh? She hesitated. Very small. For a moment, neither spoke. The air between them felt charged, like there was more to say but neither knew where to start. Grace finally broke the silence. You play beautifully. That song. It stayed with me all night. He smiled, looking down at his hands. It's an old habit, I guess. My way of remembering. Her eyes softened. Your wife? He nodded. Yeah. She passed away a few years ago. Grace's throat tightened. I'm sorry. Thank you, he said quietly. We had a good run. She loved music more than anyone I knew. That song was special to her. Grace's heart pounded. Do you remember where she heard it? Ethan looked up, brow furrowed. She said it was from a college concert. Some guy played it on stage for someone he loved. She said she never forgot it. Grace's breath hitched. She felt the world blur for a moment, memories flashing like lightning. Daniel on stage, smiling at her, promising her forever. She turned away before the tears could form. That's incredible. Ethan tilted his head. You okay? Yeah, she said quickly. Just a lot on my mind. He didn't push, but the look in his eyes told her he wanted to. Later that night, Grace sat in her car outside the diner, the same one where she'd first heard the melody. The sign flickered softly, the hum of traffic faint in the distance. She should have driven back to the city hours ago, but her heart wouldn't let her. She looked down at her phone, Daniel's old photo staring back at her. A memory she could never fully delete. The same face that haunted her dreams. And now, somehow, that song, their song, had found its way back to her through a man who had no idea what it meant. Was it fate, coincidence, or something in between? Pride is a liar, and theirs was about to cost them everything. Ethan stood by his window that night, the piano still and silent. Outside, the town was quiet, but inside, his thoughts were anything but. He couldn't shake the look in Grace's eyes. The pain, the confusion, the familiarity. And Grace, sitting in her car under the dim diner lights, whispered to herself, why him? Why now? Neither of them realized it yet, but the truth, the one hidden inside that song, was about to change everything. The next morning, the diner was busier than usual, the rush of customers echoing off the walls. Grace sat at the counter, her usual corner booth not appealing today. She needed space, but more than that, she needed answers. She had told herself she'd leave Cedar Creek by noon. But as the clock ticked on, her resolve weakened. She couldn't stop thinking about Ethan, about the way that Melody had unlocked something inside her, something she hadn't realized she'd buried. A familiar voice broke her thoughts. Mind if I join you? Grace turned to see Ethan, standing in front of her with a hesitant smile. I thought you'd left town already, he said, the warmth in his voice a stark contrast to her guarded tone. She gave a small, forced smile. I was going to, but I've got some time. He glanced around, then slid into the booth across from her. I get that. Hard to leave a place that's been home for so long. Her eyes narrowed slightly. Is that why you're still here? Because it's home. Ethan paused, studying her face. It's not just about home. It's about what matters, what keeps us going. He leaned back, folding his arms. But sometimes, even that doesn't feel enough. Grace felt a pang of something she couldn't name. She knew exactly what he meant. Silence stretched between them for a moment, and then he spoke again, softer this time. I don't mean to keep bringing up your past, but that song, Grace, it's something. I can feel it. I saw it in your eyes when I played. What happened? Who was it for? Grace froze. She didn't want to go there. Not now. Not when she was just starting to find the pieces of herself she'd lost. She had buried Daniel's memory for so long, convincing herself she was past it. But now, sitting across from this man, with the echo of that song still haunting her, she wasn't so sure. She swallowed hard, forcing the words out. It was from someone I loved. A long time ago. Ethan nodded, eyes softening with an understanding that made her chest tighten. You don't have to tell me everything, but I can see it, Grace. Whatever it is, it's not something you just forget. She looked down at her coffee, swirling the liquid. No, you don't forget something like that, but you learn to move on. Ethan leaned forward slightly, his eyes serious. And what if moving on means forgetting the part of you that mattered most? Her breath caught. That's not fair, she whispered. I didn't mean it that way, he said quickly. I've been trying to move on from things too. From my wife's death. From losing everything I thought I knew. But sometimes it feels like the past is all you've got left. Grace studied him, seeing the pain beneath his words. There was something raw about Ethan, something real. She had expected him to be a cliché, a small-town guy living in the shadow of his past. But there was more to him, and the more she saw, the more she realized how much she had in common with him. After a long pause, Grace spoke again. I didn't think I'd find someone like you here. Ethan raised an eyebrow. Someone like me? She hesitated. Someone who feels like they're still fighting for something. Someone who's not ready to just let go. For a brief moment, their eyes met, the weight of unspoken understanding hanging in the air. Then, the bell over the diner door jingled, pulling their attention. Ethan glanced over his shoulder, his face shifting. Well, that's my cue. Got to get back to work. Grace nodded. Of course. Ethan stood up but hesitated for a moment. I don't know what's pulling me to stay here, Grace. I don't know what it is, but something about you, about this town. It feels like a story I'm supposed to finish. Her pulse quickened at his words. She wasn't sure what he meant. Was he talking about her? About something deeper? I'll be around, he added, his voice low, and then turned to leave. Grace stayed seated, watching him walk out of the diner, the door closing softly behind him. Later that evening, Grace found herself standing outside the hardware store again, staring up at the dimly lit sign. She hadn't planned on coming here, but her feet had carried her without her realizing. She didn't understand why, but something about this town, about Ethan, kept pulling her in. She couldn't shake the feeling that she was meant to confront whatever was left of her past. Her phone buzzed in her pocket, breaking the silence. She fumbled to pull it out, glancing at the screen. A message from her assistant. The board is calling for a meeting first thing tomorrow. We need a decision on the Cedar Creek deal. The words blurred as she stared at the screen, feeling a sudden weight on her chest. The pressure, the deals, the endless commitments, they all felt so far away. What was she really looking for? She looked back at the hardware store, where the lights had begun to flicker. Ethan was inside, working, living, fighting for what mattered. And here she was, still clinging to a version of herself she didn't recognize anymore. The realization hit her hard. The past wasn't the only thing keeping her stuck. Grace took a deep breath and stepped into the store, knowing full well she was walking into a chapter she didn't want to write. As she walked through the door, the familiar smell of wood and metal filled the air. Ethan looked up, surprised to see her standing there. She had no plan, no idea what came next. But for the first time in a long while, she felt like maybe, just maybe, she was ready to find out. The soft ring of the bell broke the quiet hum of the hardware store. Ethan looked up from the counter and froze. Grace stood in the doorway, a faint breeze from outside brushing against her hair. You're back, he said, surprised but not displeased. I didn't know where else to go, she admitted. I just needed to talk. He set down the wrench in his hand. Then talk. Grace stepped forward, glancing around at the rows of tools, the scent of pine and old metal filling the air. I didn't realize how much this place meant to you. Ethan gave a small laugh. My dad started it when I was a kid. Said a man should build something with his hands before he leaves this world. She smiled faintly. That sounds like something my dad would have said. There was a quiet moment. Not awkward, but heavy. The kind of silence where both people feel something changing and aren't sure how to name it. Ethan leaned against the counter. So, what brings a woman like you back here twice in 2 days? Most people can't wait to leave Cedar Creek. Grace hesitated. Maybe I was wrong to think leaving would fix everything. He raised an eyebrow. You don't strike me as the kind of person who runs from problems. She gave a soft laugh. You'd be surprised. Ethan studied her. The calm strength she showed on the outside didn't match the look in her eyes. There was pain there, something unfinished. He walked to the back wall, grabbed 2 cups, and poured coffee from the small machine he kept for long days. You look like you could use this, he said, handing one to her. Thanks. She took a sip, smiling. You make good coffee. Don't sound so shocked, he teased. I've had a lot of practice keeping myself awake. Their laughter filled the small space, light but genuine. Then, as the laughter faded, Grace looked down at her cup. Ethan, can I ask you something? Sure. Why do you keep playing that song? He hesitated. Because it reminds me of her, my wife. She loved it. I play it to feel close to her again. Grace nodded, her voice soft. It's a beautiful melody. Yeah. She said it made her believe love could last forever. Grace's heart tightened. She stared at him, unable to stop the ache rising in her chest. Ethan noticed her change in expression. You okay? She forced a smile. I'm fine. Just reminded me of something. But she wasn't fine. Not even close. Because the truth was clawing at her. The song wasn't just something she remembered. It was something that had been written for her. Her first love, Daniel, had written that song. And now, all these years later, she was standing in front of a man who somehow knew it. A man whose life had been built around it. Ethan broke the silence. Grace, I don't know what your story is, but you seem like someone who's been through a lot. She met his eyes. I have, but I think everyone has. Some of us just hide it better. He nodded. Maybe. Or maybe some of us just stop trying to hide. She smiled sadly. You don't strike me as someone who hides much. I did. For a long time, he admitted. After my wife died, I didn't want anyone to see me. Didn't want to talk, didn't want to play. I thought if I stayed quiet long enough, the pain would go away. Did it? He shook his head. No. But I learned something. When you stop trying to bury pain, you make room for new things to grow. Grace looked at him for a long moment, her throat tightening. There was something in his words, something she needed to hear. He didn't try to fix her. He didn't pry. He just understood. As the sun began to set, the light outside turned golden, pouring through the store's front windows. Ethan and Grace sat by the counter talking about small things, the town, the people, even the weather. It was easy, comfortable, like they'd known each other longer than a few days. For a moment, Grace almost forgot the secret she was keeping. That her company was preparing to buy out this store. That his life, this quiet world he'd built, might soon be torn apart. Her phone buzzed again. Another message from her assistant. Deal closes tomorrow. Need your signature. Her heart pounded. Tomorrow. She looked up at Ethan, who was smiling as he fixed a display of paint cans, humming that same melody under his breath. She couldn't do it. Not to him. Not now. But if she didn't sign, she'd be risking everything she'd worked for. Her reputation. Her company. And yet, for the first time in years, those things didn't seem to matter as much. Ethan turned, catching her distant look. You okay? She forced a smile. Just tired. Long day. Something like that. He nodded toward the small piano in the corner of the store, an old upright, slightly out of tune. Play. She blinked. I don't play. Then listen, he said, sitting down. His fingers moved across the keys, slow at first, then stronger, fuller. The melody filled the store, wrapping around her like a memory she'd been running from. Grace felt her eyes sting as she listened. It wasn't just the song, it was the way he played it. Gentle, honest, familiar. She pressed her hands together, fighting the tears threatening to fall. When he finished, the silence that followed was deafening. "That song," she whispered. "It's beautiful." Ethan smiled faintly. "It's more than a song. It's a story. I just don't know how it ends yet." Her voice trembled. "Maybe you're not supposed to." He looked at her, searching her face, trying to read what she wasn't saying. And in that quiet moment, between two people who had both lost and found, everything around them seemed to pause. The next morning, Grace would have to choose between the life she built and the heart she was just beginning to find. As Ethan closed the store that night, he caught a glimpse of her walking away through the window, her figure fading into the orange glow of the streetlights. He didn't know what she was running from, but deep down, he hoped she'd come back. Grace, clutching her phone in her trembling hand, whispered to herself, "What am I doing?" Because tomorrow, she would have to decide whether to save her company or the man who unknowingly held the key to her past. The next morning, Cedar Creek felt colder than usual. The wind cut through the trees, and the sky hung low, gray and heavy. Ethan opened the store early, humming softly to himself as he flipped the sign to open. He glanced toward the door, half expecting to see Grace walk in with that warm smile she tried to hide behind her coffee cup. But she didn't. He tried not to care, tried to convince himself it was just another day. Yet something inside him ached, the kind of quiet ache that comes from missing someone you shouldn't. Grace sat in her car across the street, watching him through the window. Her phone buzzed on the passenger seat. Final reminder. Need signature today. Noon. Her chest tightened. She looked down at the contract again, her company's buyout papers. Cedar Creek Hardware was listed right at the top. Ethan's store, his father's legacy. If she signed, the store would be gone within weeks. Her hands trembled as she reached for the pen. She could end this right now, but her mind replayed his words from last night. When you stop trying to bury pain, you make room for new things to grow. She couldn't do it, not without telling him the truth. Grace got out of the car and crossed the street, her heels crunching against the pavement. When she stepped into the store, Ethan looked up, startled. "Didn't think I'd see you today," he said with a grin that didn't quite reach his eyes. "Ethan, I need to tell you something." He frowned. "You okay?" She swallowed hard. "No, not really." She placed the folder on the counter and slid it toward him. "You should see this." He glanced down at the company logo, Sterling Industries. The name meant nothing to him. But then he saw his store's address on the first page. He froze. "Grace, what is this?" Her voice shook. "It's a merger. My company is buying several properties in town, including yours." His expression changed, confusion melting into disbelief. "You're saying you're behind this?" She nodded, tears filling her eyes. "I didn't know it was your store until after I met you. I swear. I tried to stop it, but it's not that simple." Ethan took a slow step back, his breath sharp. "So you came here knowing my whole life was about to be taken apart?" "No, Ethan." He held up a hand. "Don't. Just don't." The warmth in his voice was gone. In its place was something cold, cracked. "I trusted you," he said quietly. "I don't trust easily, Grace. But I thought you were different." "I am different," she whispered. "This wasn't supposed to happen like this. But it did." He laughed bitterly. "Guess I was just a story to you. A small-town project you could walk away from." Her tears finally broke. "That's not fair." "No." His voice rose. "You come into my life, sit in my store, listen to me talk about my wife, my past. And the whole time, you're the one pulling the strings behind the scenes?" Grace stepped forward. "I didn't mean for it to happen this way. I didn't even want this deal. But I had to fight to keep my company alive." "Right," he said, his voice breaking. And what about me? What about the life I built here? She didn't answer. She couldn't. Ethan turned away, walking behind the counter. His hands shook as he tried to steady himself. You should go, Grace. Please, Ethan. He looked up at her, eyes red. Go. The word was soft, but it hit her like a door slamming shut. Grace stood outside the store, the cold air biting her cheeks. She felt empty, like all the walls she'd built around herself had collapsed. She climbed into her car, but she didn't start it. Instead, she sat there, gripping the steering wheel until her knuckles went white. Tears blurred her vision as she whispered to herself, "What have I done?" Inside the store, Ethan sat alone behind the counter. The papers she left behind were still there, staring up at him like ghosts. He picked them up, flipping through the pages. It didn't make sense. Grace, the woman who laughed with him, who listened like she actually cared, was part of this? He looked toward the piano in the corner. The sunlight from the window glinted off its surface. He walked over, sat down, and pressed his fingers against the keys. But this time, the melody didn't sound the same. The notes came out sharp, uneven, full of pain instead of peace. He stopped playing halfway through. His hand shook as he rested it on the keys. "Why her?" he whispered. Grace drove back to her hotel that afternoon, trying to call her assistant. But halfway through dialing, she stopped. She couldn't let this end like that. Ethan deserved more than silence. So she turned the car around. By the time she got back to the store, the lights were off. The door was locked. She could see him inside, sitting at the piano again, his head bowed. She stood there for a moment, watching through the glass. The man she'd hurt, the man she'd started to care for. Then she did something she hadn't planned to. She reached into her bag, pulled out the contract, and tore it in half. The sound was sharp, echoing down the quiet street. Ethan looked up, startled. Their eyes met through the window. Grace mouthed the words, "I'm sorry," and for a second he didn't move. Then slowly, he stood up and walked toward the door. He didn't open it, not yet. He just stood there, inches away from her, separated by a thin layer of glass and all the mistakes between them. The wind picked up, blowing the torn pages down the street. Grace turned to leave, but before she could, she heard the faint sound of the piano behind her. He was playing again, the same melody, but this time it sounded softer, sadder. And when she realized he was playing for her, her chest broke wide open. Sometimes love survives even when trust doesn't. But that night, both Grace and Ethan learned that broken things can still find their way back to music. Grace walked away into the night, the wind brushing her tears away. Behind her, the melody kept playing, a fragile thread tying them together, even as everything else fell apart. She didn't know it yet, but by morning, one small choice would change everything again. The next morning, the streets of Cedar Creek were quiet, the kind of quiet that only comes after a storm, when everything looks the same, but nothing feels like it was before. Ethan sat alone in the back room of the store, his hands wrapped around a cup of coffee that had long gone cold. The papers were gone now. Grace had torn them to pieces right in front of him. He'd seen it with his own eyes. But that didn't erase the hurt. He leaned back, staring at the ceiling. "You wanted honesty," he muttered to himself. "Well, you got it." The air smelled faintly of sawdust and rain. Somewhere outside, a truck rumbled past on Main Street. Life was going on, like it always did, but inside, Ethan felt stuck between anger and something softer he didn't want to name. He stood, walked over to the piano, and pressed a single key. The note lingered, faded. Then he pressed another, and another. Soon, the melody filled the small store again. Only this time, it wasn't for his late wife. It wasn't for Grace either. It was for himself. A few miles away, Grace sat at a booth inside a roadside diner just off the highway. Her coffee was black, her notebook open. She'd been staring at a blank page for an hour, trying to write down what she felt, but the words wouldn't come. Finally, she scribbled 2 lines. "I built a life out of control and plans. Then I met someone who showed me what peace sounded like." She set her pen down, staring at the words. They scared her because they were true. Her phone buzzed. It was her assistant again. Need to confirm the final decision. Are we still acquiring Cedar Creek hardware? Grace stared at the screen for a long moment. Then she typed back, "No, we're not." And just like that, it was done. The weight she'd been carrying began to lift, piece by piece. The waitress, a middle-aged woman with kind eyes, refilled her cup. "You okay, honey?" she asked. Grace smiled faintly. "Getting there. You look like someone who just made a big decision." Grace let out a small laugh. "You could say that." The woman nodded knowingly. "Sometimes doing the right thing doesn't feel good at first. But it will." Grace stared out the window, watching the rain start to fall again. The woman's words sat deep in her chest. She pulled her phone closer and opened her email. There was one she'd written last night but never sent. Addressed to Ethan. Her finger hovered over send. Then she pressed it. That afternoon, Ethan was sweeping the floor when his phone buzzed. He almost ignored it. But when he saw her name, he froze. He hesitated for a moment, then opened it. "Ethan, I don't expect you to forgive me. I just needed you to know that the deal's off. The store's safe. I told them I won't go through with it. You were right. Some things are worth more than money. I'm sorry I hurt you. More than anything, I'm sorry I didn't tell you the truth sooner." Grace. He read it twice, 3 times. Then he sank into the old wooden chair by the counter, staring at the message. His hands trembled slightly as he typed back, "Thank you. I don't know what to say." She replied almost instantly, "You don't have to say anything. I just wanted to make it right." He stared at the screen for a long moment before setting his phone down. Something inside him shifted. That evening, the rain cleared. The sunset stretched long across the sky, golden and calm. Ethan locked up the store and walked down Main Street, past the bakery, past the small diner that always smelled like cinnamon and coffee. He passed the window of a music shop and paused. Inside, a young boy was sitting at a keyboard, his mother beside him, smiling proudly as he played. Ethan watched for a moment. Then he smiled, not the kind that hides pain, but the quiet kind that means healing has started. Grace drove back into town the next day. She didn't know if she'd see him, but something in her heart told her she needed to try. When she reached the store, she parked across the street and sat there for a long time, watching him through the glass again, just like before. He was rearranging shelves, humming softly. She smiled. The sound was faint but familiar, that same melody she'd heard the first day they met. Taking a deep breath, she got out of the car and crossed the street. Ethan looked up when the bell over the door rang. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Finally, he said softly, "You came back." Grace nodded. "I had to." He folded his arms, trying to stay composed. "You didn't have to do what you did." "Yes, I did," she said. "I couldn't walk away knowing what I'd done. You don't deserve that." Ethan studied her, his jaw tight but his eyes softer than before. "You really canceled the deal?" She nodded. "It's done. Your store's safe." Silence stretched between them. Then he said quietly, "Thank you." Grace swallowed hard. "You don't have to thank me." "Maybe not," he said, "but I want to." For a long moment they just looked at each other. Two people who had broken something fragile and were now trying to rebuild it, one honest word at a time. The rain began again, light this time, tapping gently on the roof. Grace smiled faintly. "Seems like it always rains here." Ethan chuckled. "Yeah, but I've learned it usually clears up after." Her eyes shimmered. "I hope so." He hesitated, then said quietly, "Maybe tomorrow you could come by again. I could show you what I've been working on." Grace nodded. "I'd like that." She turned to leave, pausing at the door. "Ethan?" "Yeah. I'm glad our paths crossed. Even if it hurt." He gave her a small, genuine smile. "Me too." She stepped outside into the rain, her heart both heavy and lighter than it had been in years. Grace didn't know what tomorrow would bring. But that night, as the storm settled and the town grew still, one truth began to rise between them again. Sometimes love waits quietly, just beyond forgiveness. As Grace drove away, she glanced in the mirror and saw Ethan standing by the door, watching her go. He wasn't angry anymore, just thoughtful. and for the first time both of them began to believe that maybe, just maybe, this story wasn't over yet. The next morning the world felt softer. The air in Cedar Creek was crisp, washed clean from last night's rain. The clouds had cleared, and the sunlight fell across the quiet streets like a promise. Ethan unlocked the front door of the store, the bell chiming softly as he stepped inside. He breathed in the familiar scent of wood, dust, and morning coffee. But something about the space felt different today. Lighter. He moved through the aisles, humming the same melody, the one Grace couldn't forget. Only now it sounded full again, steady and calm. For the first time in a long while, he wasn't haunted by the past. He was standing in it, alive, grounded, and ready to move forward. A few blocks away, Grace walked along Main Street with a paper bag of pastries in one hand and 2 cups of coffee in the other. The barista from the corner shop had smiled when she'd walked in. Back again. Grace had laughed. Yeah, thought I'd start my morning the right way. Now, as she approached the store, her stomach twisted. She didn't know what she'd say to Ethan. She just knew she wanted to see him. Not as a CEO, not as someone trying to fix what she'd broken, but as herself. When she pushed open the door, the bell rang softly, just like it had the first day they met. Ethan looked up from behind the counter. Their eyes met, and for a moment, neither spoke. Then he smiled, a real smile, small and kind. You came back. Grace held up the bag and coffee cups. I brought peace offerings. And breakfast. He chuckled. You didn't have to. I know, she said. But I wanted to. He took one of the cups, their fingers brushing for the briefest second. It was simple, but it meant something. They sat by the front window, the soft morning light spilling over the counter. Grace handed him a pastry. I figured after all the drama, we could use something sweet. He laughed lightly. You're not wrong. For a few minutes they just ate quietly. No big talk, no tension. Just 2 people sharing a moment that felt real. Finally, Ethan set down his cup. You know, I was angry. I mean really angry. Grace nodded. I know. But last night, he continued, I thought about what you did. Tearing up that contract, you didn't have to. You risked a lot for me. She looked down. It wasn't about risk. It was about doing what felt right. I've spent so many years choosing money, image, success. But none of it ever gave me peace. He leaned forward, elbows on his knees. And now, Grace smiled faintly. Now I just want to live a life that feels honest. Even if it's smaller. Even if it's slower. Ethan studied her, his eyes soft. You'd fit right in here. She laughed quietly. Don't tempt me. Outside, the street began to stir. Shop doors opening, car engines starting. People greeting each other with nods and smiles. Life, simple and steady, moved on. Grace watched the world outside and said, You know that song you play? I finally remembered where I heard it. Ethan looked curious. Yeah, my first love wrote it, she said softly. He played it for me once when we were kids. I hadn't heard it again until that day here. I think that's why it hit me so hard. Ethan's expression softened. So that's why you froze. She nodded. I thought I'd buried that part of my life. But then you played it, and it all came back. Not the pain, just the remembering. He smiled faintly. Funny how music does that. She met his gaze. You made it yours, though. The way you play it, it's different. Feels like healing. He hesitated, then said quietly, Maybe it's time you had your turn to play it. Grace blinked. Ethan, I don't. He gestured toward the piano in the corner. No pressure. Just try. After a long pause, she rose and crossed the floor. Her fingers hovered above the keys. She pressed one, tentative at first. Then another. The notes were uneven, hesitant. But Ethan joined her, sitting beside her on the bench, his hands guiding hers. Soon the melody found itself again, the same song now shared. For a few moments, the store filled with music that felt like peace. When the last note faded, Grace's eyes shimmered with quiet tears. Ethan whispered, That sounded like forgiveness. She smiled through her tears. Maybe it was. Later that day, They closed the store early and walked to the local park. The sky was pale blue, the air warm enough to make everything feel gentle again. They sat on a bench beneath the oak trees, watching kids play on the swings, families laughing nearby. Grace said softly, "It's been a long time since I just sat like this. No meetings, no deadlines." Ethan nodded. "You get used to the quiet. Sometimes it's all you need." She turned to him. "You ever think about starting over?" He smiled faintly. "Every day." Grace took a deep breath. "Maybe we both should." The afternoon sunlight shimmered across the lake beyond the park. The ripples caught the light like small pieces of gold. Ethan looked at her, his voice steady. "I don't know what happens next, but I'd like to find out. With you." Grace's eyes filled. "I'd like that too." He reached out and gently took her hand. There was no rush, no grand gesture. Just a simple, honest connection between two people who had been broken and somehow found their way to each other. As the sun dipped lower, Ethan pulled a folded piece of paper from his jacket pocket. "What's that?" Grace asked. He smiled. "Something I've been working on." She unfolded it. Sheet music, handwritten and smudged from use. At the top, he'd written the second verse. Grace looked up at him. "You finished it?" He shook his head. "Not yet. Thought maybe we could finish it together." Her smile deepened, soft and full of hope. "I'd like that." They sat there, hand in hand, watching the sunlight stretch across the water as the day turned to gold. That evening, as the lights of Cedar Creek twinkled on, Ethan walked Grace back to her car. Before she got in, she turned to him and said quietly, "I don't know if I believe in fate, but I think I believe in second chances." Ethan smiled. "Then maybe that's what this is." She reached up and touched his hand. Small, simple, and sincere. "Thank you for forgiving me." He met her eyes. "Thank you for showing up." They stood there for a moment, the town around them glowing in the soft light of evening. Quiet, calm, full of possibility. And as Grace drove away, Ethan turned back toward his store. Inside, the piano waited, and he knew exactly what he'd play next. Sometimes the best stories aren't about perfect people. They're about broken ones who choose to love anyway. If this story made you feel something, if it reminded you that forgiveness is worth the risk, you know what to do. Stay a while. There's more to come. Do you believe in second chances? Drop a heart in the comments if you think some hearts find their way back, no matter the distance. The piano's melody filled the night once more. This time, it wasn't a song of loss. It was a song of beginning. And for Ethan and Grace, it was only the start of everything they never thought they'd find again. Thank you for watching this story to the end. If you enjoyed this story, you will surely love the next one. It's as crazier and more intriguing as you can ever imagine. So do check it out. Click on the image showing on your screen right now to watch the next one.